we have 70 dead bodies, 3 motor vehicle chases with 5 crash and burns, hand biting, stabbing, exploding helicopter, exploding airplane, exploding tent, exploding Nazi, spear to the back, multiple spears to the chest, candelabra to the head, 1 sword fight, multiple kung fu, suitcase fu, ex-marine fu, midget fu, babes in fur bikinis wrestling over an alligator pit fu, 3.5 stars. Let us continue now.
Welcome to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Joe Bob Briggs has been entertaining horror fans for over 30 years now, and most recently with his server-crashing, internet-breaking Shudder marathon, The Last Drive-In, he's ushered in a whole new slew of fans, myself being one of them. Somehow, growing up, I never tuned into Monster Vision. I don't know how. I grew up on horror. I was totally the right age. Somehow I never got to see it. However, after watching his Shudder special, I became an instantly huge fan of Joe Bob Briggs. His humorous anecdotes mixed with his very encyclopedic knowledge of cinema is a magical combination that adds so much to the viewing experience. Instead of simply making fun of the movies like Mystery Science Theater, Joe Bob helps audiences appreciate the movies more while also making fun of them. The lineup of 13 movies in the marathon was such an amazing mix of well-worn classics and a bunch of movies that I'd never even heard of before. Rewatching movies like Pieces, Reanimator, Hellraiser, and Demons with the companionship of Joe Bob and his commentary, which is equal parts hilarious and fascinating, was an incredibly fun viewing experience that breathed new life into these movies for me. Also, the fact that The Last Drive-In crashed the Shudder servers when it aired really indicates that live TV and shared viewing experiences are not dead in this age of streaming. This couldn't make me happier. The Last Drive-In brought horror fans together all over the world and was originally supposed to be a one-shot deal, but due to the very popular demand, Joe Bob and Shudder announced that he is doing 2 more holiday specials and even a regularly occurring Shudder show. On November 22nd, you can catch the Dinners of Death Thanksgiving Marathon on Shudder, starting at 9 p.m. And then on December 21st, we get a very Joe Bob Christmas Marathon on Shudder. We talk about both of these specials in today's episode, as well as the state of horror in general, and we hear about his one-man show, How Rednecks Saved Hollywood. It was a real pleasure speaking to Joe Bob Briggs, and I really enjoyed this episode, and I hope you do too. Now, for your listening pleasure, here is Joe Bob Briggs. Having grown up on monster movies and being the kind of person who sits down and watches a ton of obscure movies myself in my spare time, it's so much better to have you walk us through these horror movies, and it makes it so much easier to sit through some of the more laborious ones when we have you showing us and teaching us what to look out for and all of that. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks. I'm kind of amazed that it's become so mainstream, to tell you the truth, because when I first started writing about these movies, it was definitely a niche. There weren't very many of us, and it's kind of incredible to me that so many people now have sort of come over to the side of genre. We have to call them genre films now. I never called them genre films. I always called them exploitation films. But it's been a whole cultural change over the past couple of decades.
I really got a lot out of your article about the loneliness of cord cutters, and I thought that it really spoke to this time period and how, for me, horror is such a shared experience. It's best when it's a shared experience. I mean, I've sat through enough horror movies alone by myself, lonely, and had perfectly good time doing it, but it's way more fun in a theater. It's way more fun with someone you can discuss it with. And considering your role as a film historian and having been somebody who was very much a big part of drive-in movie culture, where do you stand in terms of where we are when it comes to horror and shared experiences in this age of VOD? And did your Shudder 24-hour marathon Do you feel like that is bringing you closer to fans, and that's something that is kind of indicative of where we need to go as far as encouraging people to all watch things together?
Yeah, people are desperate for shared experiences. I mean, I do frequent shows at Alamo Drafthouse theaters around the country, and often 95% of the people in the audience have already seen the movie. They're there for the shared experience. They're there for to have the same emotional experience at the same time in real time. I'll give you the most extreme example of that. About 3 weeks ago, at the original Alamo Drafthouse on 6th Street in Austin, Texas, I presented the movie Dead Heat. I don't know if you know the movie Dead Heat.
Yes,
it's not.
Steve Johnson did that.
Okay, it's not a good movie, but it has things to talk about. It has things. It has interesting things that are part of that period, and I have to say, I was shocked. I was being bold in presenting it in the first place. It's one of those 30th anniversary things, but I was shocked by the audible fan reaction throughout the movie, whether that was laughing at the movie, laughing with the movie, but it was just so much more enjoyable an experience. It was actually taking a bad movie and making it into a good experience simply because people were there and simply because we had a setup for it. I did the setup and so experiences like that are, if you ask Netflix, they'll tell you, well, that's not the future. The future is one person at a time on his individual device, streaming a movie whenever he wants to see it, that's the future of the whole world. Well, I don't think so. Because it goes against our emotional needs. We emotionally need to experience not just horror, but comedy and theater and many different kinds of performance is just better when it's experienced together. It's almost impossible to watch some kinds of performance on video.
Right.
It just doesn't translate at all to video, and so yeah, I think, and we're kind of breaking the rule book with what we do on Shudder, because we're asking people to show up at a certain time on a certain night, which is really old school TV, because you'll never, because you might never be able to see it again.
Right.
Like turning in to see Milton Berle in 1948 or whatever that was. That was really true. If you didn't tune in at that particular time, that show was gone. You would never see it again. And so it's not quite that urgent an experience, but because people have access to all different forms of social media, and because they can form little viewing groups, we think that this is going to be the future of a certain kind of, you can't call it television anymore because it's not really television, but it's a certain kind of streaming that's going to, that I think more and more people will do, because you just can't replace that, that audience, an audience watching together.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely something to that. And it's funny, the other day I saw Hellfest in 4DX. Have you ever done 4DX?
No.
That's a theater that they rig with hydraulics so that the seat moves and shakes in complete correspondence to the action that's happening on screen. And
okay, yeah. Well, I've done those. I've done those fancy shows they have in Vegas like that.
Right. They're coming to more mainstream theaters though for some reason. And if it's raining on screen, they shoot water at you. It's fun for about the first 15 minutes, and then it just gets very tedious. But watching Hellfest, watching a slasher in 4DX, you get splashed with water whenever there's a kill. So it simulates blood hitting the faces of the audience. So that was something new. Nobody expected it, but the crowd reaction was just insanely fun and hilarious. And that just reminded me how much fun horror is as a shared experience. And I mean, I think that obviously with Shudder and the fact that the servers crashed is really indicative of how people yearn for that shared experience and how badly they all want to be tuning in together and just feel that kind of camaraderie that comes with a bunch of people watching something in real time.
Yeah, I was a skeptic. I mean, I told the producer, I said, "You really want to do a format that's 20 years old?" I said, You're really not supposed to do that in TV. You're not supposed to repeat." you know.
Right, right.
And so I was surprised that people. I was surprised I got so much love from people who were they either remembered the old shows or they had discovered them on YouTube or they wanted to they were just intrigued by the fact there are young people who are intrigued by the fact of movie hosting in general because it hasn't really been common over the past couple of decades. As the TV hour, the broadcast TV hour got shorter and shorter, as more of it became commercials and less of it became
Right.
content. Nobody could afford hosting, so hosts went away. I think the hour now is 42 minutes, and at one time it was 48 minutes. I think at one time it was 50 minutes. So that's how much we've lost in terms of the cable companies. Sort of like rather than making it more user friendly, they made it less user friendly as they came under attack.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't exactly make sense, but somehow that's what they're doing. It's what they seem to be doing. And you've gone on record as saying that film is the only medium that, as the years go by, the actual technology gets worse and worse as far as the overall quality and look of movies. Are you a big proponent of using film instead of digital and having that old film look?
Well, I think that ship has sailed. I think you can't. Nobody's going back to film. I mean, pretty soon there will be no place to process the film. There'll be no place to buy actual good film stock. So that's kind of that era is kind of over. But it's true that there was never. The 1930s were probably the greatest film image ever created. I mean, it was widescreen Technicolor. I don't think there's ever been any better image, and most people have never seen a widescreen Technicolor image because they unless they've seen one of those restoration prints of Gone with the Wind or The Wizard of Oz or one of the big budget movies from the 30s. They don't really actually know what that image is because they've never seen it.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are gravitating to movie theaters that do show old film prints, which definitely just makes me happy. So one thing I'm wondering, I'm a New Yorker. How did you find your way to New York?
Back in the late 80s, I was getting these invitations to audition for films, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I asked my agent where were the best film acting teachers in the world. And he said, well, you have to go to one of two places. You have to go to New York or LA. And I said, what's the difference? And he said, well, the New York guys are these old method guys that derive from the group theater and the Stanislavski technique and all this stuff. They're all these old crusty guys that have been around forever. And I said, what's in LA? And he says, the students of those guys. And I said, well, I don't want to go to the students of those guys. I want one of those guys. And so I moved to New York to study acting, studied acting for 3 years. At Carnegie Hall Studios with Fred Kerman, who was one of the original Meisner guys. And it was so much easier to work in New York than it was in Texas. And so I just stayed. And so that's how I ended up in the city.
Very, very cool. And is acting still something that you're interested in pursuing more of nowadays?
Not really. I mean, I do it when someone asks me to do it. I was just in a horror film in Austin, and occasionally, usually they want me to play myself or some version of myself or some redneck sheriff or something like that. So I do that when they ask me to do it, but it's not primarily my focus. I'm primarily a writer,
right?
And so that's what I do most days. I have very boring days. I'm at the keyboard,
right. Well, speaking of writing, are you considering writing more books?
Yeah, I'm writing a history of the exploitation film. That's my big project.
Wow.
And I'm also we're talking about possibly reprinting I have like I don't know how many it is. It's like 5,000 uh, reviews and scripts and things, and things I've written about films.
Mm-hmm.
About 20% of them have been published, but all those books are out of print. Um, and so, actually, the week after the marathon, they have some kind of algorithm on Amazon, I think, where if you get a lot of requests for a book all at the same time, the price automatically goes up. And so the week after the week after the marathon in the summer, my original book, Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In, which is a crappy paperback on crappy paper, was selling for $5,000 for a couple of days on Amazon.
Wow!
And that's only because it's no longer in print.
Right.
It's like I could probably find a few copies if somebody wants to buy one for $5,000, but I don't think any were sold for that. It's just funny because if 1,000 people ask for a book on the same day, suddenly the price shoots up. They've got that down to a science.
Yeah. So as a film historian, you obviously have a really good sense of what is categorized different previous eras as far as horror, like what the 80s was, what the 70s was. How would you categorize this current era? What are you seeing as some of the most prominent trends in a kind of historian sensibility? How would you categorize our current era of horror?
We're kind of in a decadent era of horror because almost every filmmaker, certainly in the United States, that's working in horror today, is always trying to express a debt to a prior generation, which I don't like at all. They're enamored of the '80s. Having lived through the '80s, I thought there were some cool things in the '80s, but not that cool, not so cool that we should be constantly repeating things that were done in the '80s. And so no one has broken through with it. The horror audience historically would turn over every 5 years because it was a very young audience. And so you constantly had to discover the new thing that was in our subconscious fears. So, for example, you had movies in the '80s like Forbidden World is a good example that were they were about AIDS. There was nothing in the story about AIDS, but the idea of or David Cronenberg films, those were all about AIDS. It was about things inside our bodies that take over our bodies,
Right.
And so that was a great fear of the day, and and that's why those films were successful. The most original film of the past 5 years is probably Get Out. Because it's sort of
right.
He decided to go in the direction of social consciousness horror. I don't know what you would call that, but so that's a good sign. That's a good sign that somebody is looking for a new subgenre of horror. I think the third act of that movie falls apart. It's like when they get to the brain surgery part, it's like blood-sucking freaks. It's like there's
just waiting for Malthus to show up.
Yeah, I saw better brain surgery in the 50s. So, but other than that, it's a good sign that he and it's another good sign about that particular director is that he's going to stay with horror. He's not just doing horror in order to get a calling card within the industry so he can do real films later. Even the guys who do retro genres who do it very well, like Ty West, he does it very, very well. But it's like, but you sort of want to say to him, okay, but now do something truly revolutionary, something truly groundbreaking, something truly, future looking. And so, I'm tired of the remakes. I'm tired of the sequels. I'm tired of the homages to the '80s. I'm waiting for the next big thing. It's great. I'll tell you the thing that makes me optimistic is that Stephen King's the second version of it, made how much? $400 million. I think it made $400 million worldwide. It may have made more than that.
Yeah, it was huge.
And the important thing about that is not so much that Stephen King got richer, but the important thing about that is that studio executives and indie executives look at those numbers, and suddenly the script that has been floating around LA for the last 10 years that's considered too quirky to make, suddenly that script becomes commercial. And suddenly they want to do things that they didn't want to do last year. And so the importance of it is not, and also The Shape of Water winning the Academy Award.
Right.
The importance of it is not so much what, that people are going to copy those films or that those films are starting a trend. The importance of it is that people are going to start going deeper into the pile of material instead of doing the easy thing, the easy remake, the easy sequel. And they're going to start making some of these films.
Right.
And so that's a really good thing for horror.
Yeah, I think people are taking it seriously as a category. A monster movie winning Best Picture, Get Out being up for Best Picture. It's showing that these are not just niche audiences and that there's a very wide universal appeal to it, and that these are genres that deserve to be taken seriously.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's a great time. So I want to talk about your one-man show, How Rednecks Saved Hollywood. For people who aren't familiar with it, can you describe what it is and talk about the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, I was asked to come to Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi a few years back to do a presentation on Southern film. And Millsaps College is a very blue blood private school, very, very serious about film. And I guess they wanted me to come there because I would be like comic relief or something. And so I started going like deep into the area of Southern films, redneck films, Southerners who appear in mainstream films, indie Southern films, and it opened up this whole world, and it developed into this show that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I would occasionally do it, always in the South, and I kind of perfected it about 5 years ago at the Chattanooga Film Festival, and I thought, wow, and it's what it is. It's a history of the redneck as told through cinema. And it has about 200 clips and stills, and it goes all the way back to the original redneck in Scotland. I won't give it away, but we name the original redneck and show how they went from Northern England to Scotland to Ireland to Pennsylvania, down through Appalachia and spread out through the South and the Ohio River Valley. And we tell all this through film. And through not just exploitation films, although it's heavy on exploitation films, but also through mainstream films. And I talk about Hollywood's evolving view of the redneck and use of the redneck right up until present times. When I describe it like this, it sounds like some academic thing. It's really a lot of fun. It's comedy as well as film history, as well as just a lot of great clips that you want to see again and again and again. So anyway, I do it as a one-man show, and I used to just do it in cities that love their Confederate monuments. Okay, and then as time went on. Actually, the manager of the Coolidge Theater in Boston asked me to do it up there. And I said, I've never done this in the North. It's like, it's such a thing about, being a Southerner and what and he's like, no, they're going to love it. And I said, well, okay, make sure every redneck in Boston is there, all three of them. And, so we did the show and the audience liked it. And, maybe because they're Irish up there. Maybe because they feel like they're outsiders too, So
right, maybe.
So anyway, so I started doing it everywhere. I'm doing it this weekend at the Denver Film Festival. Doing 2 shows, one on Saturday night and one on Sunday afternoon. And the reactions to it are interesting. People do want to hang around afterwards and talk about it. Anyway, I've been doing that a lot, and I enjoy doing it because it's kind of eye opening. It kind of relates somewhat to the current politics and divisions in our country,
Right.
even though I don't ever say anything explicitly about that, but I talk about things that unite us, that should unite us and not divide us.
Right.
Because most people who are spokesmen for Southern whites these days are not good people; they are bad people, and
Right.
so it's like, well, here's another way to think about it, guys. Here's another way to look at it. So it has that element to it too, which is sort of why I'm doing it a lot this year.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. I mean, in the midst of all of what's happening politically, I feel like, to me, the most important thing is for Americans to get to know other Americans. And I think particularly in New York, people have not been to the South very much. They don't understand very American Southern culture.
Oh, listen. Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. I mean, I used to say to my high school buddies, I went to Parkview High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I used to say to my buddies, you guys, 5 years after graduation, they still hadn't left Arkansas. And I would say, hey, once in your life, you got to go to Europe. Once in your life, you got to go to New York. Once in your life, you got to go to
Right.
California. You got to see other parts of the country. Today, I would say to people on the Upper West Side, hey guys, you need to go to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. you need
Right.
you need to stop having these caricatures of people out in the Midwest. You need to go to Lawrence, Kansas, and West Texas and places like that. You need to sort of like know some real people instead of talking about people like they're cartoon characters.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think it's just Americans need to understand America better, and I think that there's this very kind of interdivision, and I think anything that's going to enable us to do that better, I think is definitely is really important, particularly now. What have been some of the most exciting new horror titles for you lately? I mean, I know that you are very outspokenly enthusiastic about it. Has there been anything else in the past few years that you were really excited about?
Well, I like all three of last year's movies: Get Out, It, and Shape of Water. But
Mm-hmm.
ever since the Shudder thing happened, they have me watching these movies that supposedly are from the 80s that I've never heard of. And I was trying to watch every movie in the 80s. And suddenly they'll spring these titles on me and they say, yeah, this is a 1987 movie. And I say, really? I said, where did it play? And they say, oh, it had a big theatrical release. And I say, well, it may have had a theatrical release in Boise. It never came to Dallas, Texas, and something's going on where they're like re-releasing these films. They're always forgotten gems. They call them forgotten gems. They never say movie too crappy
Right.
to get a regular theatrical distribution in 1987. And so I've been spending a lot of my time watching stuff that I didn't know existed that's like 30, 35 years old. And I don't know where they find these things. I guess they're things that like are made by a small investor group and they're released regionally and they just play in, the Florida area, or they just play in the, the Illinois area or something, and people in the rest of the country don't see them. So I've been spending a lot of my time doing that. So I don't see a lot of new movies. And as I say, I sort of like to wait till all the excitement dies down and then
Right.
go to the movie when I'm the only guy in the theater.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So you on the show have a very enviable looking man cave. Where do you watch at home, and do you have any sort of rituals for when you sit and binge movies?
Big leather couch, nothing special, big screen. And of course, when I do these shows, I've got to watch it 2 or 3 times, and I've got to, take notes on it and match it with the research and do all that. And that's the boring
Right.
part. I always try to watch it one time where I can just enjoy it.
Got it. And really, really excited about your upcoming specials, Dinners of Death. and Very Joe Bob Christmas. Were the ideas behind both of these yours? In other words, is there a big connection between food and horror, for instance, that you've been wanting to explore?
Well, yeah, because on Thanksgiving, everyone has the big dinner. And so I thought, well, if we're going to do a Thanksgiving show, Shudder wanted a Thanksgiving show. And so I thought, okay, well, let's theme it with Dinners of Death. And so we came up with 4 movies. It's a mini marathon. It's not like the 13 movie marathon of the summer. So it starts at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific on Thanksgiving night, and they don't want me to tell the titles. But if you know much about me, and if you've ever heard me ask what's my favorite movie of all time, then my favorite movie of all time is in this show. However, I've never hosted it before because all the time I was doing drive-in theater on the movie channel. And when I was doing Monster Vision on TNT, it was on the Too Grisly for Cable list. It was considered, it was banned,
right?
Even on premium cable. And so I was never able to host it. And so this will be the first time I've ever hosted my favorite movie. So,
oh wow!
And I talk, and because I talk too much, the thing will probably go till dawn. So, and then at Christmas, we're doing a Very Joe Bob Christmas on the 21st, which is the Friday before Christmas. Mm-hmm. And that show is also a mini marathon. It's 4 movies. I think I can say this. The 4 movies are all in one franchise. So,
oh, wow.
So that's a very interesting show. And we have a very distinguished guest from that franchise who will be on with me. After the first of the year, I'm not sure exactly when, but we're going to start a weekly double feature. So that'll be interesting. That'll be more in the sort of original Monster Vision format.
Very cool. Yeah, definitely excited about that. Speaking of Monster Vision, is there, and everybody has a different answer to this. Is there one central repository that has all of the old episodes? How do we go back and see them? I know there's a little on YouTube, but are they all in one place somewhere?
Yeah. My storage unit is probably the only place.
Okay.
There are fans who have cataloged all the shows from both shows, from the drive-in theater show, which ran 11 years, and the Monster Vision show, which ran 5 years, and those. But no, nobody's ever put together all of the old shows, and of course, one company owns the interstitial and another company owns the movie. And so I don't know if you could ever put them all together because of the rights issues. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little complicated. Right. Last few, just kind of quick rapid fire questions. I know you probably don't want to give away your favorite movie because it's a secret for the upcoming special. And I'm sure you get bothered by people constantly asking you what your favorite scary movies are. So to have a few kind of variations on that question, did you have any turning point movie that you saw and you realized that this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to be a writer, you wanted to be a film historian? Was there one movie that just kind of set you on the path indefinitely?
Ooh, good question. No, there wasn't really. There wasn't really any particular movie. And remember, when I first started writing about movies, I was writing about all genres, not just not just horror, not just exploitation. But I was drawn to exploitation, and I was drawn to foreign films. Mainly because I was in Dallas, Texas. So if a foreign film made it to Dallas, Texas, it was probably a good film, because there was just one a week.
Right.
No, it was more the experience of sort of deep diving into the world of film. I just came to a point. I was more of a bookworm in college, and it was more about books. And then one day I discovered, um, uh, at the time that I graduated from college, you had repertory theaters were just starting. They were called repertory theaters, or they were called art houses, and the two kinds of movies they had were foreign. They had a lot of foreign films. They were showing all the Fellini, and they were showing all the Godard, and they were showing, but they were also, the midnight movie would always be a cult film. And so I wherever I lived, I would always be a regular at those theaters. I mean, in the days before VHS, you had to find the movie and see it, and you couldn't watch it again until it came back.
Right.
And so you had to be dedicated to be a cinephile in the 70s, because there was no storage of the movie. You couldn't have the movie
Right.
at home. And so these theaters were godsends, because they were showing something other than Hollywood mainstream movies. So I would say that was the formative influence, is those theaters, and especially there were two of them in Dallas, where I was living in the 70s, and I watched everything that they had at both theaters. And then when I started reviewing movies, I noticed that there were films that I was missing because they only played at the drive-in, and that developed my interest in exploitation films. And then Roger Corman was one of the early fans of my column, and
Right.
so we became acquaintances, and I was able to learn a lot about the business of exploitation films from Roger. And actually, the drive-in totals are a direct result of conversations with Roger about what the main elements are in an exploitation movie.
Uh-huh.
So,
oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I was curious about your relationship with Roger Corman. I know how it came about, and apparently he had access to movies that before other people would. He was the one person who was able to see some of these more obscure titles, and then you both became friends.
No. What it was is I was a critic at the paper in Dallas, the Dallas Times Herald, and so I would call up the distributors and say, "Would you please screen this movie for me so I can have my review on opening day?" And they would say, "We never screen movies for critics."
Oh, okay.
Except Roger. Once Roger saw the column, he would say, "Oh, okay. Well, go over to my friend. He has a theater, in Dallas. Go over there on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, and he'll run it for you." And so that's how I got to know Roger. And I went out to LA and toured the what's called the Lumberyard, which was his film studio on Venice Boulevard in Venice. And it was still a lumberyard. It's like half of it was a lumberyard and half of it was a film studio. And we got to know each other, and I became one of the early champions of a lot of Roger's early movies that were not well known at the time. And so yeah, I still consider him one of the greatest producers in history. They used to say, I used to introduce him by saying, he's made 700 movies and only one has lost money, and that movie was a William Shatner 1962 movie called The Intruder, and it was a movie about racism in the South. And because it didn't make money, Roger said, "Okay, from now on, I'm putting all social cause stuff in the subtext," and his movies became more fantastical, and he made a lot of sci-fi that had social commentary subtext in it.
Yeah,
but he never again made a straight drama like that. And so in the year 2012, somebody who owns The Intruder made a sale to Great Britain, and it went into the black.
Hmm.
and so after 50 years, even that movie went into the black. So Roger can actually say he never had a movie that lost money.
Wow. And he's still working to this day in his 90s, from what I understand.
He still is. I saw just a few weeks ago, I saw a Chinese language horror anthology executive produced by Roger Corman.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. Is there a movie that you have gifted to other people more than any other that you've either given to people on Blu-ray, and what's been your most gifted movie?
That would be Basket Case, because I've been associated with the film since the very first screening of it in 1982 or whenever that was, and I've been friends with Frank Henenlotter, the director, all these years, and it's frequently a movie that I'm asked to host. In fact, I recently did a film festival in Port Orchard, Washington, where they actually stopped the film 5 times so that I could talk about it during the film.
Oh my God!
So Basket Case is sort of the ultimate cult movie, and it's a very well-made movie. It's a very entertaining movie. It's a movie that you don't get tired of watching, repeat viewings.
Yeah,
and I've hosted it many times, and it's always a popular gift, and the Blu-ray is cool. And I'm also friends with Kevin Van Hentenryck, the star of it, and he's a sculptor. He works in monumental stone sculptures, and he lives in Woodstock, New York. And for a lot of reasons, I just have an attachment to that film, and I've given it to a lot of people.
Very cool. And on an emotional level, it must have been pretty amazing to see this movie that you were involved with in the very beginning stages, during a time when movies like this were not taken seriously. And now it was just remastered by MoMA. I mean, the Museum of Modern Art just helped with the remastering. And it's kind of amazing how these things come.
Oh, wow. Circle. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible that these movies that when they first came out were despised, are being revered today, and some movies that should have been despised are being revered today. But the Basket Case is not one of them. Basket Case is a brilliant movie.
Yeah, it's a real gem. So, last question, maybe most important: what can we do as horror fans to help preserve these traditions of shared storytelling experiences?
Support your local Alamo Draft House or whatever type of repertory theater you have in your community, and go to these events and join the social media groups that support horror and talk about horror and keep the conversation going. One of the bad things about being a TV host these days is in the old days, I could get away with so much. Today I make one factual error in a monologue or something. Man, they are all over me. 5 minutes later, it's like there is no room for error when you are when you live in the world of the internet. So and that's ultimately a good thing. And I found that, but people take great delight in correcting me, and so. It's great that people are fanatic about horror films, but let's not get carried away. Okay.
Right.
Let's have a few other things in our lives.
Right.
Let's not just do that.
Right.
I'm sometimes amazed by the academic interest in horror. I just got a book length. They send me these books. I just got a book length treatment of I Spit on Your Grave, the original I Spit on Your Grave,
oh my God,
published by Columbia University Press. Wow. It's like that's another area where I say let's not get carried away. Okay,
right.
It's like You should still read Shakespeare before you watch I Spit on Your Grave. That would be my advice if you're going to Columbia today.
Put Shakespeare above the rape revenge genre as a whole.
Right.
For sure. On that note, Joe Bob Briggs, this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Big, huge thank you to Mr. Joe Bob Briggs, and another thank you to his wonderful associate, Tracy Vonderbrink. Thank you both so much. Thank you guys for listening. Don't forget to tune in to Dinners of Death this Thanksgiving at 9 p.m. on Shudder. Let's all watch it together at the same time in real time like real horror fans, and let's crash those Shudder servers once again. Thanks again, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. You can follow the show on Instagram on I'm Nick Taylor. That's I am Nick Taylor. Same handle on Twitter. And if you enjoyed this episode, it'd mean the world to me if you could share it with your friends and family. Thanks again.